faithfully sharing value and interpreting great books worldwide. Hi, this is Sally with the Book Talk. Today I'm introducing this book called From City-States to China, which is the second book in the Kodansha China history series. Its author, Hiroshi Tatsuro, is a Japanese historian and professor at the University of Tokyo. This book tells the history of China's spring and autumn and warring states periods, which were crucial for forming Chinese civilization. Culturally, back then, a bunch of awesome thinkers like Laozi, Confucius, and Mozi popped up across China. Politically, the old patriarchal feudal system broke down. Big feudal lords moved away from city-states and turned into autocratic, centralized states. Qin, a western state that changed the most, beat others and took over the Central Plains. Qin's huge centralized empire gave Chinese civilization a unification gene. So the Central Plains kept strong military power, no matter the wars or splits that came later. All right, let's dive into the book's content now. The book covers three main questions. First, how Chinese civilization grew and expanded. Second, how Chinese characters spread widely. Third, how the Chinese concept of all under heaven came about. Now, let's start with part one. In the 11th century BCE, the Shang dynasty started declining. At the same time, the Zhou tribe in the Wei River Valley rose up. Then, the Zhao leader, later King Wu of Zhao, teamed up with other tribes, crushed the Shang dynasty, and became the new ruler of the Central Plains. But back then, the Zhou dynasty only controlled the Wei River Valley and Middle Yellow River areas, which are parts of modern Shanxi and Henan. Outside that zone, the Zhou's influence was pretty weak. So, to strengthen rule and spread influence, the Zhou king gave land to family members beyond his direct control. They set up feudal states to unite local powers and boost Zhou's sway. For instance, King Wu of Zhou enfeoffed his three brothers to the old Shang heartland to stop Shang forces from coming back. These three feudal states, in today's Hebei city, Henan, were called the Three Guardians. As the name says, they were set up to watch over Shang remnants. Later, Duke Dan of Zhao, the regent, created a strict ritual and music system to control all nobles, especially feudal lords, regulating their army sizes and official ranks. This severely limited their political freedom, preventing expansion. On the flip side, when lords arrived at their fiefs, differences in language, customs, and culture with locals made control tough. Locals could only rely on their blood relatives and followers to rule, but blood ties are super exclusive, so it's hard to include outsiders. This made it tough to integrate non-blood commoners into the state system. So, for ages, each lord's rule was shaky, and they even needed the Zhou king's help to survive. Over the next 300 years, the Zhou dynasty rose, peaked, and then fell. In 771 BCE, the declining Zhou dynasty took a fatal hit. The Quanrong tribe from the northwest teamed up with the Shen state to invade and sack the capital Haojing, now Chang'an district in Xi'an. The next year, King Ping of Zhao had to move the capital to Luoyi, now Luoyang's old city district, kicking off the spring and autumn period in Chinese history. Meanwhile, over those 300 years, lords weren't happy as constrained vassals. They kept pushing for growth.
Now, with the Zhou king losing the capital and power, lords went wild, starting crazy wars against each other.
Slowly, strong states gobbled up smaller neighbors, becoming regional powers. For instance, Chu in the south annexed states like Sui, Dang, and Kai along the Yangtze tributaries and Han River, leaping to dominance in southern China. Similarly, Jin in the north swallowed states like Guo and Yu, becoming the top dog in northern China for a while. At this time, the Zhou king was still the big boss in name, but regional powers had taken over as the real leaders in Chinese civilization. Then, in the late spring and autumn period, major states started a new round of political reshuffling. The former northern hegemon Jin was split by three powerful noble ministers into the states of Han, Zhao, and Wei. Meanwhile, the powerful coastal state of Qi also underwent a political coup. The original ruling Zhang clan was replaced by the noble Tian family. Knowing well that the initiator may not escape consequences, these new rulers gradually strengthened monarchical power and suppressed nobles to avoid their predecessors' fate. By the early Warring States period, constant wars had reduced the Zhou and Enhaft states from over 100 to just over a dozen, each growing stronger with intensifying competition. But as we said, rulers relying on noble kinship had limited grassroots control, hampering effective wartime mobilization of resources. Thus, despite multiple regional powers emerging during the spring and autumn period, none could fully replace the Zhou king as true ruler of all under heaven.
Continuing with only noble composed armies simply couldn't meet wartime needs.
This forced states to break aristocratic constraints and mobilize commoners for conquest wars. That's when the Ritsuryo system emerged. Note, Ritsuryo system is a term commonly used in Japanese historiography. Here, Ritsu means criminal law, while Ryo refers to administrative decrees. Chinese academic calls this the autocratic centralized system, but will continue using Ritsuryo. To consolidate domestic rule and win conquest wars, regional powers launched reforms, replacing feudalism with the Ritsuryo system. This system broke the nobility's monopoly on offices, rewarding military merits and granting titles to commoners while cultivating capable commoner bureaucrats. This not only improved ruling class quality, but significantly strengthened rulers' foundation among commoners. For example, late in the spring and autumn period, Wei, which split from Jin, pioneered reforms under legalist Li Kui, becoming the strongest early warring states' power. Similarly, in early mid-warring states, Qin employed famous legalist Shang Yang for reforms that rapidly strengthened it, prompting similar reforms elsewhere. Through reforms, the major feudal states upgraded from enfeoffment systems to Ritsuryo systems, with Qin's reforms being the most thorough and powerful, laying the groundwork for Qin's eventual unification of the six states. However, the author stresses that while institutional foundations are important for long-term national unity, script unification is absolutely critical. So in part 2, we'll talk about the spread of Chinese characters. Chinese characters are ideographic scripts, so changes in pronunciation don't affect their form. But it's this stable script form that infused Chinese civilization with vitality, enabling Chinese people to properly record history, pass down culture, strengthen national identity, and lay the foundation for national unity. In contrast, European civilizations using a Phoenician alphabet have phonetic scripts, so words evolve into various languages as pronunciations change. The author believes this is a major reason why Europe couldn't achieve script unification. Returning to Chinese characters, their development mainly went through 3 stages. First, early Chinese characters were ritual scripts, commonly known as oracle bone script. During divination, officials would scorch ox scapulae or turtle shells over fire. After predicting fortune based on the cracks, officials would inscribe the divination results on the bones or shells. In the Shang dynasty, only a few specially trained officials were qualified to learn and decipher it. The secrets in the divination inscriptions. Thus, very few people could read oracle bone script. Even many mid to lower nobles were illiterate at the time. Later, as bronze smelting matured, writing gradually shifted from bones to bronze vessels. Since copper was called jin, gold, then inscriptions on bronze vessels were known as jinwen, bronze script. However, characters still remained within the scope of divination and rituals. Later, after the Shang fell and Zhou arose, the central government monopolized bronze casting and script interpretation. To strengthen ties and control over feudal states, the Zhou king bestowed inscribed bronze vessels upon lords. Author Hiroshi Tatsuro notes that since script interpretation belonged to the Zhou king, most local lords couldn't read the writing. When facing bronze artifacts, they were like illiterates. Scene scholars made them feel inferior. Lords also revered the Zhou king for the mysterious bronze vessels bestowed, crafting an image of inviolable sacredness. Over time, rulers of feudal states began to grasp the meaning of Chinese characters. Looking back at the inscriptions, They found noble bronze artifacts bearing writings praising the Zhou king's benevolence and achievements. This deepened their admiration for the Zhou king, but it didn't last long. In 775 BCE, King Ping of Zhou moved the capital to Luoyang, ushering in the spring and autumn period in Chinese history.
Due to warfare and Zhou's decline, artisans and specialists who served the king scattered and were recruited by lords.
From then on, Chinese characters were no longer exclusive to the Zhou king, but became the common script among upper rulers. As rivalry among lords intensified, interactions grew frequent, and negotiations over politics and military became more complex. This forced lords to establish more efficient covenants or agreements. Thus, characters once used for rituals became active in diplomacy, serving as official evidence for alliances. For instance, in the mid-late spring and autumn period, Song State convened a lords' conference to mediate tensions between Jin and Chu, known as the Conference of Mibing. The negotiated covenant from this gathering was written in Chinese characters. Clearly, written covenants were widely accepted, marking the transition from the ritual era to the covenant era. The third stage of character development is the Ritsurio system phase. As we mentioned, during the Warring States period, states established the Ritsurio system through reforms. Thus, ruling groups urgently needed professionals versed in laws to help monarchs consolidate rule and govern. Meanwhile, the 100 schools of thought led to private schools flourishing, giving commoners access to education. Learning to read and write could lead to official positions in talent-scarce society, enabling social mobility and motivating people to use characters. In December 1975, archaeologists discovered 2 battlefield letters in Qintung ruins in Yumen County, Hubei Province. The letters were written by 2 brothers, addressed to their elder brother. From the letters, we learn these brothers were ordinary Qin soldiers without noble ranks, from lower middle class, yet at least 3 male family members were literate. This shows by late Warring States period, Chinese characters had spread widely. Even commoners across states could express themselves through writing. Finally, we've explored how Chinese civilization formed through political systems and script dissemination. Now let's discuss how the uniquely Chinese concept of all under heaven emerged. Ancient Chinese believed they lived at the world's center as masters of all under heaven, hence calling their nation Middle Kingdom. Author Hiroshi Tatsuro argues this worldview grew from propaganda wars between states during spring and autumn and warring states periods. The book mentions that beyond military and diplomatic conflicts, states fiercely competed in propaganda during this era. Ruling groups tried to prove their legitimacy through bloodlines and geography while discrediting rivals to gain propaganda advantage. Take Qi in Shandong Peninsula. We previously discussed how the Tian clan replaced the ruling Zhang clan. This usurpation made Tian-ruled Qi vulnerable in propaganda wars. To establish legitimacy, King Wei of Qi worked hard on propaganda. King Wei cleverly knew self-praise lacked impact, so he leveraged prestigious Lu state. Those familiar with Western Zhou history know Lu's founder was Duke Dan of Zhou. By spring and autumn period, Lu produced renowned scholars and ministers. To elevate Qi's status, King Wei first promoted Confucius, then compiled the Spring and Autumn Annals in his name. Fearing the annals' concise style might obscure its praise of Qi, King Wei commissioned scholars to write the Gyung commentary explaining it. In the Gyung commentary, the author really stressed that a son's status comes from his mother's nobility, meaning a mom's high birth can boost her son's political standing. This logic is pretty much like the later distinction between legitimate and illegitimate sons. Both tie a son's rank to his mom's status. Qi state pushed this idea because King Wei of Qi's mom had Song state blood, and Song's ancestors ruled the Shang dynasty, so King Wei claimed Qi inherited Shang's legitimacy. Plus, Qi's territory overlapped with the Xia dynasty zone, letting Qi argue it inherited Xia's legitimacy too. Since Xia and Shang were both recognized as orthodox rulers, Qi could call its domain the Middle Kingdom, while Zhou's area was just Zhu Xia, a bunch of related states. Meanwhile, distant states like Chu and Qin were seen as barbarian lands, but Qi's self-promotion soon got challenged by Han State in the propaganda war. As we said, Han State split off from the big northern power Jin, with land in modern Henan province. Though Han was the smallest of the seven warring states, it still dreamed of unifying all under heaven. To prove its legitimacy, Han faked the identity of historian Zhuo Zuanming to write the Zhuo commentary, reinterpreting the spring and autumn annals. In the Zhou commentary, Han deliberately hyped up Zheng State's famous thinker Zichan, noting he often criticized others, but only showed respect to Han Xuanzi. This Han Xuanzi was exactly an ancestor of Han's rulers. Remember, way back in 375 BCE, Han conquered Zheng State, and Zheng's old land became Han's capital, Xinzheng. And part of Zheng's territory overlapped with the Shang dynasty's core domain. So Han claimed it geologically inherited Shang's legacy. And by stressing Zheng's wise minister respecting Han's ancestors, it strengthened its right to Shang's lands. Also, Han saw itself as splitting from Jin, so it inherited Jin's legitimacy, and Jin's domain covered the Xia dynasty's core area. Thus, Han State also claimed to be the legitimate heir of the Xia dynasty. After all this twisting and turning, Han, like Qi, positioned itself as the rightful successor to both Xia and Shang dynasties. But then, the state of Zhongshan wasn't having it. So, after the Guangyang and Zhou commentaries, the final of the three commentaries on the Spring and Autumn Annals, the Guliang commentary, made its entrance. The Guliang commentary fiercely criticized ministers who usurped thrones, calling Han, Zhao, Wei, and Tian ruled Qi rebellious barbarians, while only Zhongshan deserved to be called the Middle Kingdom. Plus, when writing it, Zhongshan deliberately used the Xia dynasty calendar, Xia's timekeeping system, to show it was Xia's true heir. Now, some listeners might wonder, why even mention a small state like Zhongshan? So, how did the real heavyweights, Chu and Qin, play this propaganda game during the spring and autumn and warring states periods? Let's take a look, starting with Chu. The author argues that Chu's work asserting its legitimacy was the Songs of Chu, Chu Si. In Kui Yuan's Li Sao, the opening line declares, I am descendant of Emperor Guoyang, meaning Chu's rulers came from Zuanshu, a legendary five emperor. See, while central states traced legitimacy through Xia, Shang, Zhao, Chu jumped ahead to claim the mythical three sovereigns and five emperors. Also, Zhirong, the fire god and Zhuanshu's descendant, was claimed as ancestor by Chu. Both rulers' domains covered the Shang dynasty's core territory. In other words, by tracing these ancestors, Chu proved its legitimacy to rule the Central Plains. During the spring and autumn period, Chu repeatedly attacked Zheng state, forcing it into vassalage. This was about turning nominal legitimacy into real political gains. On top of that, Chu was a Yangtze Basin powerhouse that never took the Zhou kings seriously. After King Ping's capital move weakened Zhao, Chu brazenly declared itself a kingdom, putting itself on par with the Zhao king. Notably, after becoming kings, Chu posthumously titled its first two rulers King Wu and King Wen of Chu. These titles deliberately matched King Wen and King Wu of Zhao, the dynasty's founders, hinting that after the move, the Zhao king had lost his mandate to rule. Thus, Chu state inherited this qualification. After discussing Chu, let's examine how Qin's concept of all under heaven evolved. Initially, Qin used similar tactics as others, twisting narratives. For ancestral claims, Qin claimed Zhuanshu too, same as Chu, one of the five emperors. Moreover, after the Quanrong tribe sacked Haojing in late Western Zhou, Qin troops escorted King Ping to Luoyang. As reward, Zhou promised Xin could keep Guanzhong, central Shanxi, if they expelled the Quanrong tribes there. Though seeming like an empty promise, Guanzhong contained Haojing, Zhou's 300-year capital, making it extraordinary. By controlling Guanzhong, Qin could geographically inherit Zhou's legitimacy and dominate propaganda battles. So Qin fought desperately for this land, finally expelling Quanrong after generations of bloody wars and settling in Guanzhong by mid-warring states period. After Duke Xiao employed Xianyang's reforms, Qin's power surged, becoming the leading state. Thus, its ambition to conquer all under heaven grew daily. In 239 BCE, 9 years before Yingzheng launched unification, Chancellor Lu Buwei commissioned the Lushi Chunqiu, blending legalism, Confucianism, Taoism, and more. And then, for example, its Taoism came from Chu, Confucianism from Lu or Qi, legalism from Wei, states Qin once viewed as barbarian enemies. As Qin's leader, Lu Buwei, incorporating these philosophies, showed Qin had transcended state rivalries and begun thinking as ruler of all under heaven. The author notes Lu Buwei planned to make Lushi Chunqui the future Qin Empire's mainstream ideology. This shows Lu wanted to include all Huaxia lands within Middle Kingdom, the central realm. But when King Yingzheng, later first emperor, took power, Chancellor Lu Buwei was exiled and committed suicide. Lu Shishenghui's inclusive worldview embracing diverse strengths was abandoned. After unifying the 6 states, Xinshi Wang Yingzheng adopted a one-size-fits-all approach, brutally imposing Qin's cultural and legal standards across the conquered territories. For example, the Qin Ban Liang coin inherited Qin's round coin with square hole design, while all other state currencies like spade and knife coins were abolished. Similarly, we know of standardized script, unified track gauges, and consistent measurements. This established absolute authority throughout the empire. The former 6 states were completely Qinified. In other words, Qin Shi Huang had zero interest in other states' legitimacy narratives. He dismissed them all, whether Shan Shangzhou dynasties or the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors. What he demanded was, under heaven, all lands belong to Qin. Sadly, the Qin dynasty collapsed quickly under peasant uprisings. The succeeding Han dynasty denied Qin's legitimacy when establishing its own. Instead, Han positioned itself as heir to Shang Shangzhou traditions, lasting 400-plus years through 29 emperors. Han deeply embedded its values in Chinese consciousness, cementing the veneration of Shang Zhou as the orthodox worldview. But note, while the spring and autumn or warring states period crucially shaped Chinese identity, this is uncontested. The exact formation process remains unclear due to scarce historical evidence from antiquity. Author Hiroshi Tatsuro uniquely argues that Confucian classics were created with strong political motives, compiled by warring states' rulers as cultural weapons to prove themselves the center of Huaxia world with legitimate unification rights. This theory sparked huge controversy in Japanese academia, yet due to Hiroshi's stature, it spread widely through Kodansha's books, influencing public historical understanding. So I remind listeners, use stones from other hills to polish jade. Examine historical claims dialectically. Don't blindly follow. All right, we've covered most of From City-States to China. Let's summarize. Warring states competition drove Chinese character standardization, the Ritsurio system's emergence, and the all under heaven concept, establishing the Chinese ideal of grand unification. But this era wasn't just China's golden age, it pushed forward all of East Asian history. The author notes China's historical development was way ahead compared to other East Asian nations. In the 3rd century BCE, after Qin unified the states, China established a centralized system based on the Ritsurio legal codes. Meanwhile, Japan had just entered agricultural society. Not until the 4th century CE did Japan form a unified state, and even then, it was underdeveloped. Only in the 7th century CE, with the Taika reforms, did Japan establish a centralized state. By then, China had already entered the glorious Sui and Tang dynasties. Thanks to Chinese character adoption, ancient Korea, Vietnam, and Japan all used Hanzi as their official script. This let Korea and Vietnam easily study China's institutions, replicate its Ritsurio system, and build mature states. You could say China's development jump-started progress for all East Asian peoples. From this perspective, China truly deserves its title as East Asia's central kingdom. All right, that wraps up our exploration of From City States to China. Reading notes are below the audio. See you next time.